Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
So thank you everybody for being here today. We are on a Sunday afternoon broadcasting from North America. And although we have a small contingent in North America, what makes this meeting so powerful is the representation that we're getting from the rest of the continents. And so we have the strength of all the viewers around the world that are giving to this meeting. And we have been proceeding on a course, and we've been trying to distill the over 6,000 hours of teaching, because this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. Today, we're looking at the Advanced Outer Space Review. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is December the 3rd, 2023. And this is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So 4 years ago, we started on a path to try and understand the difference between the limitations of man-made laws and the unlimited limitations of the universal role of man. And of course, there are no limitations in the universal community. And so we wonder why we have this hesitancy to go to the highest energy states, and we continue to dwell on the lowest energy states. And so it becomes one of the false failings and weaknesses of man. And we've been trying to distill the over 6,000 hours of teaching, as has been outlined in the books of Mr. Marantaba Keshe, such as book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter, which was followed up by book number 2, The Structure of the Light, and it was followed up by book number 3, The Origin of the Universe, which strangely enough is not book number 1. But what we've been trying to do is understand this plasma highway, how to get on it. Is there an off-ramp? And is there a speed limit? And what all is going on? Because we've always been searching for outer space on this plasma highway. And all we seem to get is that little piece of pie in the sky. And it only ends up being that little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner of man's universe. And then we look at the vastness of the rest of the universe and we wonder. And are we going to go through life wondering? Or are we going to finally come to the realization and the fulfillment of our wishes, and also the disclosure of the reality of where this plasma highway will take us? Because in our search for outer space, we have to understand that is for our embodiment of our pie in the sky. And so that has a lot of ramifications on what we are and what we can do. And so every month now, since December the 16th of 2022, we have been meeting monthly and discussing the various aspects of the soul. And as a timestamp coming up on Friday, December the 22nd, we will be meeting the soul of the lover. And it reminds me of a song, and which I think was actually done incorrect. And I think it has something to do with 50 ways to love your liver. I think that is the proper song because we don't love ourselves enough. And if we don't love ourselves, it's very difficult to love someone else because it lacks understanding and it lacks what they call the creation of the fields of attraction. And so the liver plays a really important part in our body because it has to do with the immune system. And we seem to really ignore that. So when we talk about the liver, we talk about our imagination with the brain, the emotion that comes from our imagination, the emotion that comes from our heart, and the warm feeling that we get when we are in love. And yet, as a result of that, we see a lot of pain and suffering in the physicality. And it's a job of the liver to take care of that. So we don't need to look at 50 ways to leave our liver. We need 50 ways to love our liver. And so let's practice that. And we were forced to do that in the year of 2022 when we produced the cups of life. And I keep stressing that they weren't the cups of the pandemic, but they were physical cups which reflected our emotional strength which within our core space. And so that core space is our inner space. And so we're continually looking for outer space. And so here we are in our advanced outer space review. And as we can see that this is a following up on a pattern that we've created in the advanced teaching series. And we went into understanding, knowing, insight, earth space, inner space, and now we're doing outer space. And we're going to be talking about a few things to try and tie up some loose ends on how we view this, because violations keep coming, and we have to understand that these violations are greater than what we realize because they involve humanity's domains. And if humanity's domains only involve your space and the physicality and the immunity that is being realigned with the liver, and we're failing at that, and how does that affect our earth space? And since earth space is more than just earth space, and we are more than just man space, so how does that affect our inner space? And if that effect is profound, then how does it affect our outer space? And where exactly is that? So we're looking at these violations because we can't answer these questions. So we kind of really have to understand the difference. And when we say violations, there are different types. So bullets and hand grenades are one way to kill people. But in our earth space, we can do mining and tunneling, which is kind of the same thing. It's a damage. But in terms of our inner space, we have terrorism and mind control. And although they don't have the physical characteristics, they certainly do have the characteristics of the damage that can be created. But the worst of all is murder and suicide. So, and when we say murder, it's not so much being murdered; it's acting as a murderer. Because it's so diminishing and it really denies your access to outer space. And if you murder someone else or murder yourself is in suicide, the action actually becomes the same. And so not only does it limit, but it diminishes. And this becomes a serious problem because life is for learning and life wants to grow. And if we're practicing these type of violations, we find that it is violating that ethos. And so, what is your position as a violator? Are you the perpetrator? Are you the instigator? Maybe you're just an agitator. Or are you a provocateur and maybe even paid to be a provocateur? Or are you the murderer? And I wonder, if you have the hand that pulls the trigger and that same hand caresses your child, I wonder how you can tell the difference. And what is the difference if you murder another child or you caress your child? What is the difference? And maybe it's the difference between you being the instigator and you being the revenge seeker. But all of this has an emotional feedback and it has its emotional penalties. So when we look at what happens with these violations, so we talk about penetration of infiltration. So as far as a man space, that would be our skin, but as far as earth space, that would be our crust. But as far as the universal community is concerned, that includes our sensibilities. Well, we are part of the universal community, so it affects our sensibilities. And the earth space is a product of the universal community, so it affects the sensibilities of the earth space as well. And so we tend to grab onto this, what we call a karmic attachment. And it talks about agitation, pollution, and disruption of harmony, and the continuation thereof. And it becomes part of our learning experience. So if we focus on that as a student, we could be actually a violator student. And if there's a student, there's a teacher, and the teacher also could be a, a violator, or the teacher could be violated. And so there's this karmic attachment. And so we really have to beware of the finger pointing of the accuser, because there's a lot of importance attached to revenge. But you see, the focus of attention when you follow those fingers is that every finger that's pointing has several fingers pointing back. And so we have to understand that what we're talking about is the revenge of the soul. And that communication is done through the cosmic rays, and that facilitates our soul embodiment. And that is the whole discussion for today, because it involves the origin of the universe. So the creation of the universe and how the universe is created exists from energy, and energy is always a charge in motion. So since energy is always in motion and energy always exists, then energy is always positive. So the only difference between positive and negative is the motion position. And so when we look at the universal order of creation and we see the combination of matter, dark matter, and antimatter coming into one field, and then that particular field is in motion, well, where is it going? And if it's going somewhere, maybe it has arrived. And where did it come from? So with all these questions, we have to find out which things are in combination. And so we have to make a lot of choices. So one of the things that we have to understand is there's a charge in this motion. So we can take this energy and use it as an emission energy, and we call that magnetical. Or we can take this energy and call it an absorption energy, and we call it gravitational. And so all of this is affected through rotation, speed, strength, and direction. And so these charges are always in action. And as we can see, it can go around the field or it can go right through the field. But it's constantly changing its personality from magnetical to gravitational and so on. So it's almost like a train. You've got the front, you've got the back, and the back of the one is attached to the front of the next, and so it goes. So we can see that this charge and how we define it as negative is the giver and the positive is the taker. So there is a flowing that is going on. But that flowing, if it's not looking beyond its borders, then only becomes a binding. And in that process, there is a danger that that binding could be less than 100% energy exchange. And so any loss in energy exchange at that point means that the binding has a defined set of diminishment. And when I say defined set, we haven't determined the rate. And so there's a rate of diminishment, but there's also a rate of enhancement. And this is what we're talking about. The binding is important, but so is the flowing. And there's various ways to do that. So when we look at the polarity and we see how it operates in a vacuum condition, and we understand that the energy transaction is a two-way street, it's really difficult to achieve a balance. And if there is a balance, well, really, that means nothing is happening. So it's the imbalance that actually allows things to happen. And so with that imbalance, it alters the path length. And so the shorter the path length, the greater the energy transfer. I think that's simple to understand. But if we bring the fields really close together, we actually increase the susceptibility. And so we find that the binding of one marries the binding of the other. And the binding dissolves. And so it acts as one. So the binding of two coming together based on susceptibility and nearness and proximity becomes one. But we all know that there's more than one involved. So this type of duality is very important because it's reflected in the cosmic 14 connection, which is actually a cosmic ray connection. And so when we look at the identification of acidic condition, we see that a hydrogen has a mass of 1. And when we look at the alkaline condition of oxygen has a mass of 8. And so that gives us a range, but it also identifies the range between the negative and the positive. And these two simple, shall we say, borders of the range have multiple relationships. And so when we look at the periodic table of elements, we automatically can see that there's a diversity of relationships. So even though the fundamental basic cosmic ray connection can be described as acidic to alkaline, obviously there's a lot of interplay. And so the other thing that we know as we're talking about our Earth space violation is that we have mining industries. And it's interesting because we have copper in some places and silver in some places and gold in some places. And although oil is not an element, it is mined and it is in certain places. And then of course we are having these individual elements all over the world, but they're not exactly mixed up. They seem to have a preference to certain geographical locations. And so that is reflective of the Earth space soul, because the Earth space soul is not an element. So how is it possible to have all this variety? So we're talking about all these period elements on the periodic table of elements, and they're all a product of the Earth space soul. And so when we look at the humanity souls, and they're not an element either. And so we have a tremendous amount of variety of the human souls. In fact, we're all individual, we're all unique, but we're all humans. And so that's the common ground. And so when we talk about the karma is a carry forward and question, what are you carrying? And it's difficult to be truthful because sometimes it really exposes your bias, because that could be a personal bias. But is that just from your social circle, or is that something you acquired in childhood? And I emphasize the word acquired Or is that just some kind of prejudice that you have and you just haven't acknowledged it? But does that, shall we say, karma come from your ancestors? Is that possible? Does that go beyond your lifespan? And is it baggage? And is it emotionally binding? Remember that excess binding diminishes the flow. And so, do we need this baggage? So, part of it we do need it because it contributes to our biodiversity. But when we look at the biodiversity on this planet, we can see that there are different soul families. So there are inanimate souls, vertical souls, horizontal souls, and of course the soul of humanity. So each diversity is a family. And so when we make our soul reference, we have to include the soul of the earth. And of course, the soul of the earth has a soul of the earth body. And so that's what attracts the soul of the family of man. So that has to precede us. So once we have the soul of the earth body and the souls of the family of man, now that attracts the souls of the family bodies of man. And that also has to precede us. And then, of course, now that we have the soul of the earth body plus the souls of the family bodies of man, now those families can manifest physically. And so that becomes our default pathway of manifestation. And it just leads to the divergence and diversity on this planet. So we have an attraction point, but we have a divergence from that point. And so this is the part of the principal interaction that is continually happening. So we're saying that energy is in motion, but it's a two-way street. So it facilitates binding, and binding is very important to maintain that field. But when you have two different fields, as is always the case anyway, there has to be an energy that is flowing in between. And that energy is either going to be giving or is going to be a barrier. Okay, so that depends on this interaction characteristic, the pathling and susceptibility. So we have to look at the path down the street of equality, right? Because that is the reference point. We have to choose the equality reference point. So our principal interaction is going to be within our family. And that's what gives us the gravitational stability. And that's a good thing. And we find that in nature. And we often wonder, is it possible, let's take an example. You have a certain kind of species of fish, and they're all swimming in the same water. And we know that, they enjoy procreation the way we do. And I wonder if, since they are actually spreading their joy in the water, how does it affect other species? And so we find that there is actually a barrier that is naturally inherent in that. So you don't find, shall we say, the cross pollination of species. You find the gravitational stability of the attraction of the soul of family of that particular species. And so we have to identify that we are part of the humanity family. And so that's where we achieve the gravitational stability. And so how come we see the variety? And going back to the fish equation, there are certain species of fish that are common, but they have different kind of conformities or a little kind of different descriptions, characteristics, colorings. And so to differentiate, although they're the same family, we choose to identify their species by locality. Oh, isn't that interesting? So it's the same species from a different location. So let's just say fish and put in the name of the fish, whatever you want, and say comes from location A. And so that fish is different from the fish, put in the name, same name, but from location B. And so that kind of creates a variety, although it's really the same family. And so that's the case with the humanity family, because our coloration is based on the environment. And that environment leads to our gravitational stability. And that's why the soul of the family is here. And so it's the Earth family and the humanity family that creates this gravitational stability. And so we have this difficulty understanding this because it affects our emotion of position map, right? So it's our point of view that affects this. And so what we have to understand is that our emotion is actually creating a feeding radiance. And so if that energy is flowing, then there's a receptor. And so that feeding radiance is absorbed by another field, and in turn, to maintain its balance, it has to emit another feedback radiance. And since there's a nearness and proximity to that, then we absorb that feedback. And based on the selection, the nearness and proximity and path link and susceptibility, we can determine the emotion of position map. And that affects the reality dimension. And so when we're saying reality dimension, that means that this characteristic can transcend the various dimensions. But if we only talk about the one dimension and we look at the plasma feeding rule and we say, well, the higher energy field feeds the lower energy field. But we have to understand that they're different energy fields. And so it isn't just the lowest energy field within that field's strength, but it could be a field strength in a lower energy field strength. And so there are different energy fields. So the plasma feeding rule applies in that direction as well. And it's still a two-way street. So we differentiate by saying it's natural creation or natural decay. And then, of course, there's this catalytic stability. But, we have to understand in order for maintaining this catalytic stability, there has to be a give and take. And so, do we have any choices in how this operates, or are we just victims of the whole shebang there? And we have to act as the last man standing, and we have to make these choices. So let's make a plasma deal. And given three options, which door would you choose? And since all three doors are the same, on what basis can you make this decision? And can you only choose the one door? And so if we look at the physicality and we can't differentiate the physicality, then there has to be another factor that comes in to determine the choice. So these choices are based on sequence. So when we look at the attraction and repulsion forces, which we call gravitational and magnetic force fields, they actually activate the feeding and feedback. And so you as the last man standing has choices to understand that this feeding, this feedback will allow us to turn on and turn off the amount of energy that is coming or going. So in other words, we can actually affect the strength of the field by increasing it or decreasing it. And as a result of having that capability, then that's going to affect the position. And someone could say, well, that's going to either enhance or diminish the position. So there's a lot that's riding on this. And you are the last man standing, and you have the choices. So these are choices that we cannot abdicate, even though many times in physicality we abdicate that. So what we have to understand is, how do these forces come together? And so, we say, well, we see our planet, and so we chose our planet. Or was that just a dream? Well, the dream is reality. You're on this planet. So we never seem to question, or we don't question often enough, how do we get here? or how did we fulfill our dream? And so we see that whatever has happened here, this has become an inertia manifestation. And so when you say inertia manifestation, then there are other fields. And so we can't really be bothered to determine the position, the time and distance of these other fields, because what we're looking at is the product, and that product is the inertia manifestation. And we understand that that is based on path length and susceptibility. And the other thing, of course, is based on two forces coming together. So you understand that if you're trying to make a plasma deal, you have to choose at least two. So what does that mean? That means the product is gravitationally stable. And so depending on if you're going to enhance or diminish, either way, it's magnetical. So from the point of gravitational stability, you can create this magnetical force. And so when we're looking at the interaction of plasmas, and they're based on field strength, so one of the criteria is that like poles repel and opposite poles attract. But since we're talking about two fields, then we have two magnetical and two gravitational interactions. So there's actually four doors. And it's not only in one direction. So we have this plasma within our binding energy. We have this plasma within another binding energy. And then we have this free plasma that is a product of the attraction between these two binding energies. But not only, because this position of this position, so in other words, the position of the field created by the interaction of these three fields has to have a position somewhere. So the collective energy of these three fields, which is the combination, has to maintain its position in relationship to other fields. So the force field of the fields that are involved have a susceptibility to the view that you're looking at. And that susceptibility overrides the susceptibility to the others. But in the process of combination of energies, this alters the susceptibility. And so if the susceptibility is higher, then that alters the relationship of the path link. And so that energy is also in motion. So this energy, you could say it's just a free plasma energy, but it's a plasma energy based on the giving and taking principle. And so we need to understand that in our core component, we have these magnetical PM ticks, and are they plasmatic or are they physical? And so we've been referencing them as electrons, but we find that there's an anomaly here, and that is because we look at the gravitational rays and we see that they're part of this atomic marriage between the electron and the proton. And so when we look at the Magrav condition of the proton, and we see that as on book number one, the matter, antimatter, and dark matter, and then we look at the combination of the electron, and we find that it too has matter, antimatter, and dark matter. So we can understand that the combination of the atom and the relationship between the proton and the electron is a representation of the combination of the force fields of the matter and dark matter and antimatter. And that affects the positioning. And so the fundamental principle to maintain this twinity is so that the speed of rotation of the plasma of the electron is dictated by the amount of the magnetic fields which are transferred from the large twin plasma of the proton. So the definition of an atom, which the origin of the name means uncut, is cut between the proton and the electron. But the atom is uncut because the proton and the electron are representative of the magnetical gravitational force fields of that maggrav condition. And so when we look at the Kesh model of nuclear decay of the neutron, we see that the neutron is a fundamental plasma and it's in a maggrav condition. But as such, there's a giving and taking. And so at a threshold where it creates a decay process, and so that neutron then becomes an atom, the residue is the release of the PM ticks. And so if you can imagine any type of solid, there is a ray dance dimension going on to maintain the maggrav condition of that solid. There's a whole lot of action going on. It isn't just inert. It doesn't just sit there. It can't just sit there. It has to interact. So there's always a creation. And in that process of creation, there's always a decay. But that balance is only on one side of the equation. So there's a balance on the other side of the equation. And it has natural creation and balanced off with natural decay. And so we haven't been able to identify this boundary, this bonding layer in between. And so we fudge that. And it's always been our search for the reality dimension. But this bond that we've been fudging is actually the covalent bond dimension that is in between all of these interactions, regardless if they balance off in the plasmatic spectrum or if they balance off in the physicality spectrum or if they balance off between the two spectrums. And so whatever is crossing this part in between, it is determined by the pathing and susceptibility of the force fields. And so we don't need to identify this for each and every element in the periodic table of elements. We're just going to call that a vanilla radiance. Okay, and this vanilla radiance is part of the reality dimension, and this bonds everything together. So where are you? Well, you yourself are a radiance point. And from that radiant point is the radiant you. And so that radiant point becomes your launch field, but it also becomes your landing field. And so what is in between? So you have this PM6 point, and then you have this PM6 emission, this ray emission. And we operate the same way. So this radiance becomes ray creation and a ray emission. And in order to have this emission, you have to have this absorption. And understand that this all happens at light speed. But since we can't see it, that means it's not in the visible spectrum. And if it's not in the visible spectrum, then it's not in physicality. So where is it? And so this has been the quest. We've been looking for this art official. And we like to have officials, right? Because they allow us to judge others and to judge yourself. And of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But, you know, sometimes the eye is the eye of the hurricane. And so, you know, really, whether it's the beauty or the hurricane, it all affects the emotion of your vision, doesn't it? So there are other affectations that we have, that have to do with our hairstyling and nail polish and makeup, grooming, and of course clothing, right? Clothing makes the man, doesn't it? And so the fashion becomes very important because, you can raise the standards and make a fashion statement, or you can just go, and paint yourself with a tattoo or not. And then, of course, there's always another fashion statement that's depleted uranium, and then you can pierce things. And all of this is really just a form of attention seeking. And why do we need that? Why are we so preoccupied with deformations in plastic surgery, liposuction, or even leg shortening? Like someone has done me so wrong, and I never had a chance to make a choice, right? And so we see this choosing in our genders. So we talked about the goldfish, and how goldfish can actually, depending on the population requirement, change their sex. And then, of course, there are hermaphrodites where they don't need a partner. And then we look at the pH table and we can see that we can actually flip things from acidic to alkaline. And our hormones operate the same way because in relationship, one whole hormone will be an enhancement, but depending on which neighbor you're talking about, it could also be a diminishment. So these hormones are all in sequence. So again, like a daisy chain, like a train. But then we have these hybrids, which are created through cross pollination or in extreme cases genetic mutilation. And then these fantasies, which we talk about, like mermaids and all sorts of things. But what man is preoccupied today is with automation, right? Because we want robots. Why? Because uh, slaves have kind of fallen out of fashion, right? And we find that the computers are, pretty good tools. And maybe we can use the computers to be tools of slavery through the activation of robots. And of course, robots need programs. And then, of course, there's this communication network of the internet. And that has become a wireless form of communication as well. So, this wireless configuration, how does that affect the horizontals? Because we see migrations in all the species, like the buffalo roam and the chickens are free range, the birds are flying all sorts of places. Even butterflies will migrate from one country to another. And speaking of borders, well, herds don't necessarily recognize borders, not in the way that we do. And then, of course, we have a preference of breeders. So we are always looking at what we can do there. But the verticals, well, we have another different set of criteria. That's why we bring out lawnmowers, because we don't like the way uh, the verticals are going out of control. So we have uh, also, maybe we don't like the way things are looking. So we have landscapers. But, the plants can't move like we can. So they defend themselves by secreting tannin. So it doesn't allow those who are feeding off the plants to digest. And so we want to overcome that with chemical fertilizers. But the verticals, to promote their species, create flowers, which are their fashion statement and attraction. So we find from our artificial point of view, we create these competitions. Yeah, that's it. So we like to be entertained, and we have these beauty pageants. We even have show dogs and fish shows and flower displays like the Royal Botanical Gardens, and these are all representative of our biosphere, which is perfectly natural, but then, it's not natural enough. So we have to create these artificial flowers to compensate for that, right? And so man's imperfections are rooted in a form of idealism where we're looking for these perfect body Olympics. It's like the perfect mind and the perfect world. And the perfect world, of course, is uniformity and conformity. And so, the natural intelligence is not good enough. We have to substitute it with artificial intelligence because you know what? Uh, That makes the perfect slave. And then, of course, there's always this peer pressure that comes together. And why are we belaboring this thing? Because where does this social acceptance come from? And why do we still have caste systems? And what is a sporting trophy? What does it mean to have nationalism and racial pressure? Like, what is that? We're all part of the humanity family. And so, where does warfare come in? Because our warfare is not against other families, it's against our own family. One humanity family against another humanity family. What kind of family is that? It just creates stress. And so we have different kinds of stress, of course, emotional, physical, mental, and it affects our health and our attitudes. And so we have to understand the plasmatic versus the physical stress. Now, let's understand that stress is not bad because stress is annealing. And so what that means is there's a big difference between hardening and annealing because hardening is just making things harder, but annealing makes it harder so that it is tougher. And so often we're saying, don't judge a person by their successes, judge them by their failures, because after every failure, they get up and they try again. And that failure becomes part of the life's learning experience. And so to anneal a metal, you must bring it up to a critical temperature with a torch and then quench the hot metal in water. But you can also do that by continually pounding it, and you find that it becomes harder and harder and more resistant. And in that process becomes more useful. And so all of these are affecting the stress. So stress is annealing, and it's annealing for the humanity family soul. So we see that it is a facilitator for learning. And so we see what the blacksmiths are doing with horseshoes. And yes, learning can be stressful, and some teachers just want to beat it into you, but that's not entirely bad because if you don't listen to the teacher, then you're going to be learning from a school of hard knocks. But that also creates a hardening, and so this hardening becomes more gravitational. And if it's more gravitational, then the question is it more stable? Well, it depends on your point of view. So we have to understand that our point of view could actually be an altered reality. So we have to take into account the Earth space, but as opposed to Mars space, right? And then what about our inner space as opposed to what? Our outer space. And so the outer space and the inner space affects our man space. And as we said before, is it really baggage space? Is that what is our reality? So do we need to carry this baggage or can we just dump it? So we have to understand that the official man is a moral man and the soul is immortal. So can a man be immortal? Only if he's moral. And so some of the products that we have in the Kesh Foundation, the enhancement paint, where we can create an environment in the home that not only more peaceful and more stable, but also conducive to the environment that we so like, which we call a room temperature. And so we see that despite our appearances, which is kind of contradictory to the way the Earth operates in a rotating field, we find that our cells have a gravitational stability. And so, as we said about the vanilla bonding, we can talk about vanilla cells because each cell has this gravitational stability and this nearness and proximity to adjoining cells, and based on pathing and susceptibility, can decide which family it wants to be with. So you don't find the cross-pollination, if you will, between the kidney cells and the liver cells and the heart cells. They become quite unique and quite functional. And so there's always this macro balancing, and that's the point. And so when we look at the physicality of our carbon-12 and we see, well, there are isotopes of carbon-8, carbon-10, carbon-14, carbon-16, and there's a convergence and divergence. So it means that our point is a balanced condition, but energy is coming and going. And of course, if it's coming, there's a pole reference one way, and if it's going, well, we have to flip that pole so there's a pole reference the other way. And so whether it's coming or going, that is a reflection of our radiance pole. And so our radiance pole flipping has to do with our gravitational plasma, our feeding radiance, and that feeding radiance has to come back as a feedback radiance. And so if our radiance is binding, and if our radiance is a magnetical plasma, how can that come back? In process, it has to flip and become gravitational. It is still our magnetical plasma because it traverses the extreme field of our plasma existence. And then it comes back into the core and becomes the gravitational plasma. And to become that gravitational plasma, it has to create an attraction. Well, the magnetical plasma is a repulsion. So it has to change its personality. That's just the way it is, right? So even though it's flipping, it has to maintain its magnetical stability. So if you want to create a gravitational stability, you have to have a magnetical stability. You can't have one without the other if you want to create a Magrath condition. And so our existence and our soul radiation is based on the soul of man, which is the essential you, and that's the interaction between the plasmagen state and the mattergen state. But the soul of the body, well, that's the surrogate you, and that's the interaction between the plasmagen state and the environment state, the small m matter state. And at that point, we have the choice to manifest into the physicality. So what does it mean to be in a vacuum condition? And so when we look at what happened in the Kesh plasma reactor group, we found we don't operate in a vacuum. And Rick Framond, who runs the Kesh plasma reactor group and has spent many, many hours, has been amazing. He created this reactor that was full of plasma water, and he put it on a rotating motor, and he created this vortex. So the water was actually creating this, shall we say, eye of the storm. And so if we remember when we talked about the artificial judges, is it the eye of the beholder or the eye of the hurricane? And there's a side view of the vortex, and you can clearly see the shape, how it's different. At the top, it's a wide circular motion, and the center at the bottom is very narrow. And so that develops a personality which kind of reminds us of the way that the isotopes of the carbon-12 are operating. So we see that there's an emission and there's an absorption, and on one side it's magnetical, and the other side is gravitational, and it creates this plasmatic vortex in the center, and it kind of gravitates down to its physical condition. Okay. But what happens when you change it and put it on a horizontal platform? And so we look at this horizontal vortex and we see, well, wait a second, this is not conical, but it's like a tube. The diameter of the vortex is the same right across from the bottom to the top, although this rotating platform is rotated through 90 degrees, so it's horizontal. And if we stop the rotation, the air bubble, which was inserted at the top, and when we flip this thing over 90 degrees, the air bubble still stays on top. Although with respect to the uh, container that is sitting on top of the rotating platform is now aligned 90 degrees horizontal. So the bubble is actually in the same spot. The only thing that has changed has been the container. But if we add the rotation, well, not only does this bubble move from the top to the center, but it becomes a ball of its own. And it moves right to the core. And so what can we say? Well, it's gravitational. It has gravitational stability, but we know that it cannot maintain that stability unless it has a magnetical personality. So it has to go beyond this gravitational stability. In other words, it has to go through a vacuum condition. So we understand that around this planet, we have a vacuum condition. But now we can clearly see that at the core, we also have a vacuum condition. And so that totally makes sense, because from that core position, we can create a magnetical PM tick. So if we're having a gravitational stability, then we can create a magnetical emission. And then if we have a magnetical emission, in order to maintain that bonding energy, that magnetical emission needs to have a polar flipping and become a gravitational force field to be attracted back into that binding energy. But at that same time, it can interact with other fields. Well, what other fields are we acting on? Remember, we've turned this whole thing 90 degrees on its horizontal axis, but we're operating in Earth space, which the gravitational force field is operating on a vertical axis. So the way we can maintain this gravitational stability of this ball of this field in the center is by creating this vacuum field. As we've created this vacuum field, it maintains its position and its stability. This becomes a very important point, because one of the things that car manufacturers couldn't rationalize was the fact that cars were designed backwards. So when I say backwards, the pointy end is at the front and the flat end was at the back. But in terms of when they look at testing airflow, they found that if they could reverse this, that the actual dynamics were, you know, way better. How do you know that? Look at the wings of an aircraft. It's thicker at the front and thinner at the back. So why is this car thinner at the front and thicker at the back? Okay, because this is a design anomaly, and designers have been grappling with this for years. But social acceptance and fashion and the peer pressure has not allowed that to be changed. So car designers have been trying to deal with the aerodynamics in so many different ways and failing to do it in the most beneficial way is by redesigning it in our point of view backwards. So the motion of the vehicle, however, does go forward and does go backwards. And so the vehicle itself does maintain a gravitational stability, but we can alter the direction. And so what resolves this anomaly, of course, is the driver. Well, that's what's missing because the car itself cannot do that. So when we look at the Trinity components and we see that there's a plasma structure that is gravitational, and then we have the other fields, which in both directions would be magnetical, and that creates a stable structure. But there has to be some kind of plasma driver to that. And so the plasma driver decides which way we're going to go, right? So if we look at whether it's forward or if it's backwards, understand that it's magnetical. And by changing the transmission and putting it in forward gear, it becomes a magnetical drive. Or by putting it in reverse gear, it becomes a magnetical reverse. So it's just that we put more gears going forward than we do going in reverse. So in many ways, we are complying with the force field. So what we have to understand is that in the process of this motion, we have to understand that to balance off the plasmatic condition, in other words, we're just looking at the physical condition. But in order to look at the plasmatic condition, we have to take into consideration that there will be a vacuum on the outside field and there will be a vacuum at the core. And so the vacuum condition in the center of the smaller field will balance off the vacuum condition in the larger field. So the limitations that we place on motor vehicles on the surface of the planet don't apply to the other craft that we see flying around in the various kinds of space. So our point of view becomes very important and it affects our family of emotions. So we have the emotion of man, and of course that has to do with our physicality, and it's reflected in our presence, in our position, and of course our vision. So all of these are encompassed in man space's point of view. But we arrived here with a set of knowledge. And so that became the emotion of knowledge that came from the soul space point of view. And we know the emotion of love is simply irresistible. And so that becomes another family of emotion. Or is it? Or is this just a dilution of emotions? And then can we just take man space point of view and put it within our field of physicality and understand that to maintain that position, we have to interact with the plasmatic reality of other fields? which not only affect our field strength, but affect our positioning based on path link susceptibility. And so the emotion of knowledge is non-visible. The emotion of love is non-visible. And those emotions affect our physically recognized emotional points of view. And so this is the combination of the dilution of all the emotions. And so that becomes our radiance inertia. Our man space point of view has to include these other emotions of knowledge and the irresistible energy of love. And we can really tap into that by detaching ourselves from all of these emotions. Because at that point, we become free to engage based on field strength, nearness and proximity, path link and susceptibility of our true soul. And so every interaction becomes an inertia manifestation of a kind. So the PM ticks are magnetical feeding. They're energy packs, and they come together in a plasmagen conversion, which is the culmination of the principal transition in convergence matter, creates this gravitationally stable MAGRAV condition. But to be actually gravitationally stable, it has to have a feedback from an environment, and it has to have a field interaction from that environment. And that becomes your inertia manifestation. And then you have all these choices. And so as we're trying to streamline the learning, and we have to streamline the teaching. And so when someone who is new to the whole thing is asking, well, what is plasma? Tell them straight, it's a kind of energy state. And there are different kinds of energy state, and it affects your understanding of Earth space and helps you find your inner space. And when you understand those two, that opens up the gateway by turning the key to the lock that prevents us from going into outer space. And this is really, really important. Well, if that's not important, then nothing's important. So in order to understand how these fields are working, we have to understand that energy is always in motion. So we can't stop it. You can't grab it. You can't hang on to it. You can't enslave it. But what you can do is you can give it a field. And as such, you can put a track in that field so that it continues to follow this track. And as long as it has this track of attraction, then it'll stay in the field. And if the field strength is attracting more energy, then that field strength will increase. And this can happen on many different levels. And each of these levels can increase or decrease by at least an order of magnitude. So, if you're driving a car at 100 kilometers an hour, if you want to slow down, you may have to slow down to 10 kilometers an hour. And if you want to speed up, well, you may have to speed up to 1,000 kilometers per hour. So we have to understand the inertia of relations, because the strength has to be accommodated by field relations. So we have to understand that the Earth space is a kind of energy state, is gravitationally stable. The inner space of the Earth space is also a kind of energy state, but we also have an inner space. So both the Earth space and the man space are gravitationally stable energy states. So there's another gravitationally stable energy state, and that is the plasma state. And why is it stable? Because it's bound to the ethos of the universe. And so we have to understand that when we're looking at field relationships, we have to understand the difference between adversarial versus coexistence. So we can't just look at our Earth space. We have to look at our inner space as well. And we have to understand that this is where science meets the soul of man. And it has to do that for the purposes of peace, because when you're looking at relationships, everything in every space has a relationship. In outer space, we have fields and photons. In inner space, we have particles and waves. Within ourselves, we have the soul of the man and the soul of the body. And in our physical space, we have the inner space of man space and the inner space of the environment space. And so these are all balanced fields where they have relationships. And so we say that one and one is more than two because the synergy develops from that. And then what we have to understand is that one and the other one are not necessarily the same one. And when you add them together, you don't lose them. In order to have them, they have to maintain a Magravs condition. So one is a Magravs condition of give and take, and the other one is a Magravs condition of give and take. And the combination of those two create an inertia field of give and take as a combination of that. And now that relationship has enhanced, and it's more than the addition of the two. It's a synergistic balance between the two, because you still have the first two, plus you have the product of the first two. So this is where one of the scientific responsibility and one of the spiritual responsibility is limiting our man-made relationships. So this is why plasma science adds to the knowledge, because it combines those two. But what is the rate of change that we're going to go through, and can we change that? Well, it all depends on how we do our limitations, and those limitations affect our soul. So if we understand that each and every one of us is an independent variable, but we have references. So we can reference the past, or we can reference the future, or we can reference the soul of the man or the soul of the body. And so all of this affects our presence. And we have to question, what is it that is anchoring us? And is that anchor slowing our progress? Well, when we look at our man space, we find each and every one of these energy states is stable. So whether it's a soul, whether it's the emotion, or whether it's the physicality, each of them maintains a gravitational stability and a relationship to the other. And how we transcend all of these relationships are skills to learn. So our connection is gravitational. Our reference to our soul is magnetical. Our reference to our earth space is magnetical. The one magnetical reference to the other magnetical reference is not the same one. And so if we don't understand that, then we abuse our man space. That's why we have this dilemma, are we a hunter or a gatherer species? And so we use different types of abuse, such as scientific or academic or spiritual or social. So all of this affects our radiance. This is all part of radiance abuse. And so we become in that process soul hunters. After soul hunters, then you're susceptible to predation. And those predators are sometimes, to be very effective, involve not only deception, but double cross. And that becomes their eternal burden, because drawing energy from the lowest energy source, it's important to be binding. That is an important feeding choice, but not at the expense of others, because there are other energy fields that you can draw from. So if you want to just have a vacuum brain where you just suck everything in and you become that receiver, and you only see what's around you, and you don't see the rest. In fact, you have to disconnect at a soul level to do that, because you cannot discard the soul. If you discard the soul, well, you're discarding yourself, right? And we see that the connection with the soul is gravitational, and the reference to the soul is magnetical. And from that gravitational connection, the connection to the physical is also magnetical. But the connection to the soul and the connection to the physical is not the same magnetical field strength. And so the gravitational point in the center has to be complete, and it's not. And we know that because we can't open that door. We can't open that door to the soul. All we see is the relationship of our physicality with our inner space. We don't see that relationship with our soul. And our soul has no problem going through the door. It's we have the problem. We can't go through the door. We have to physically open that door. And that's a choice that we've made. And so we've done that through what we call soul disembodiment. And so when we understand the earth space, we see that around it is this vacuum of space. And through the experiments of Rick Crammond, we see that there's a vacuum at the core. And so our operation is in the biosphere range, which means the gravitational biosphere is our stable range, and the magnetosphere is the magnetical peace dome of the earth space. And the soul of the earth is in the magnetical core. So the maintenance of the earth space in the vacuum of space is a balance from this emission, from this earth space embodiment. And so, yes, our presence is embodied within the earth space, but that's only one aspect of it. We are also embodied within our body. And so to maintain this, we have to make the connection. And that is the soul morality embodiment. Because that's how the universe operates. And that's how the earth operates. And so we have to make the morality connection. Because that's the only way we can get into outer space. And we've been trying to tell people that for 302 One Nation, One Planet, One Race for World Peace seminars held by Rick Crammond every Tuesday, because that's what identifies the magnetical residue, which we call that independent variable. That's each one of us, so that we can interact with the universe and reach another one and facilitate the emotional transformation to teach another one. And this all comes from one nation, one planet, one universe, one humanity family. Well, who's the initiator? And so we have to understand that there has to be an initiator seed. And through our science, we understand that when we look at a pumpkin seed and it doesn't look anything like a pumpkin, but we understand that it goes through this preposterous metamorphosis, going from a pumpkin seed to a pumpkin. And yeah, we're glad that it did. But so do the chromosomes in our body. But the thing that happens with the chromosomes is that they multiply through division. So the chromosomes themselves maintain a gravitational stability. So they are a product of the feeding, and they create a feedback condition. So the feeding and the feedback are both magnetical, but they're also part of the creation and part of the decay. So they are manifested and represented by cell respiration, where the food comes in and the waste goes out. And so cells can be created and they can grow. And this is necessary for the purposes of repair and also for the purpose of decay. So we need to take care of this business. So we find that in the sequence of things, the RNA is the initiator. And because it's sharing the adaptation of the universal energies, and those energies are the energy of love. And that's all part of the inner space spectrum, which is part of your feeding radiance. Okay, but that affects the DNA initiator. And so that is also sharing the adaptation of the earth space energies. And so we see that on one of the initiators of the DNA is methionine, which is only found in red meat. And so that becomes part of the feedback radiance. And that also contributes to our inner space spectrum. So when we're looking at the exchange of hydrogen, and we call that the potentiation of hydrogen, or the pH, we measure alkalinity and we measure acidity, and we find that there is a healthy pH of the blood serum. And within that healthy pH, there's a certain conformity of the DNA. And when it becomes alkaline, it shrinks, or when it becomes acidic, it expands. And if it goes too far, then it flatlines. And we know what all flatlining means. So from a healthy condition, there's an initiator seed. And so we tend to say, well, that's a genetic thing because it's a product of the man and woman. Or is it emotional? Because we find that the marriage can be competition or it can be cooperation. So the point of view there matters. So is that genetic or is that emotional? So when we're talking about the creation of free plasma, we have to understand that there has to be a gravitational connection between two magnetical force fields. And so that is the creation of the star formation of the amino acid, the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, which is the creation of life. And so we see as these amino acids come together, each one has a structure and they come together to create another structure. And the combination of that is a structure within the structure. And so that's the creation. And we see that there has to be a plasmagen initiator. It's the plasmagen that initiates the physicality. And that is a space-bound connection. So we become gravitationally stable from the input and output of magnetical field forces along this z-axis. But there's a y-axis and there's an x-axis. And yet, in order to facilitate the gravitational stability, both the x-axis and the y-axis have to be magnetical. So along the lines of the star formation connection, the z-axis, in order to maintain its gravitational stability, has the opportunity to interact with the magnetical stability and flip one way or the other. And so that becomes the product of the initiation. And so when we look at how we initiate through this vortex of the carbon-12, so we find that really in the carbon-14 level of energy, it has to be gravitationally stable. And so if it elevates to a higher energy level, that would be magnetical. And if it decays to a lower energy level, such as carbon-12, then that would also have to be magnetical. And so it's a two-way street, isn't it? And the field strength is based on path link and susceptibility. So this is all part of the plasma dilution theory that's discussed in book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. And so we find that the susceptibility comes from the interaction with cosmic rays. So that's how the energy comes in. But in order to come in, there has to be a field. And so that field is based on a gravitational field, and gravity seeks density. So these energies that are coming in are magnetical atoms. And atoms are an electron-proton marriage. And so these atoms are a density seeker. And so they come in on spiral orbitals, which are in fact gravitational. And they facilitate this gravitational stability of this maggrav condition. And so in order to maintain an increase in this cosmic ray feeding, it has to be balanced off by a density within the gravitational maggrav. And so that creates an inertia field product from the feeding. And now that changes the flavor, doesn't it? Every time you add an ingredient to a recipe, that changes the flavor. And now that you've seen that process, we can continue and add more. And each and every one that comes in continues to change the flavor and continues to increase the field strength. And then the susceptibility begins to change. So what happens in that case? Well, now you've affected the pathway and susceptibility with the nearness and proximity of another field. And so now you've created a feedback flavor change, right? Because you have to take into account the other fields. So now the radiance inertia is susceptible to the initiator, right? So the radiance inertia has to have a magnetical stability, and that has to come from a gravitational stability. And the gravitational stability reflects the emotion of presence, which is affected by the position of the vision. Well, the position of the vision is affected by the emotion of that position and the emotion of the vision. And so each and every one of these has to have a stability. So what changes? It's the initiator that changes. So when we look at this vacuum rotation inside the rotating sphere in the Kesh plasma reactor group, we see this gravitational stability. But in order to maintain that stability, it has to interact beyond that gravitational stability by emitting a magnetical PM tick. And so that is us. We are facilitating this radiance emission. So that becomes part of our feeding radiance. And that travels through this magnetical vacuum. And so the feedback radiance goes from that magnetical vacuum back into the gravitational vacuum. But in that process, it has a motion. It has to keep moving. And so on that path, as it is moving, it too is having a magnetical gravitational interaction. And in order to maintain that gravitational magnetical interaction, it has to have a direction of flow to another condition. And in order to balance that flow to another condition, it has to have an offsetting flow from an initiating condition. So the feeding radiance and the feedback radiance are in constant contact. And then you have the cosmic ray initiation, which comes through because of the attractive force fields of the Maggrav condition. And then when they come in and they become part of the cosmic ray absorption, and that becomes more gravitational, now you have a polar flipping, and that comes into the Maggrav condition. And now you have the change from the vertical emission to the vertical absorption. And that comes into the gravitational plasma, the plasma core vacuum. And that allows another kind of cosmic ray feeding from a different perspective. And so when you look at the cosmic ray map, you can see that there's interaction on each level. And then there's an interaction in between each energy level. But the fastest interaction is on the plasma highway at the highest energy level. But without that traffic going on the plasma highway, these other levels won't exist. So when we look at the Earth space details, we find that we have had significant inertia fields, such as carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, environments of sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, characteristics such as iron, copper, and zinc, and the environment of the Earth space, which is silicon. And we've created our cups of life. And we don't care so much about the wires as much as we care about the magnetical and gravitational field forces that are operating between the zinc plate and the copper coil and the nano-coated copper coil. And so when we look at the Gans radiance, the radance of the Gans and the manifestation, we see that we create CO2 GANs, calcium GANs, zinc GANs, copper GANs, water GANs, amino acid GANs. And we did that with one cup of life. And we changed some components and we created a difference where one was emotional and one was physical, and the relationship where one is a gravitational taker and the other one is a magnetical giver. And then we took into account the Earth cup, the matter manifestation, and from there, the inertia, the product of the matter manifestation, and put all these cups together to create this relationship where collectively they have this magnetical gravitational interaction and this soul radiance, which reflect the inertia of the interaction with our soul radiance and the earth radiance. So this is all part of the plasma inertia family. And we can see the different energy fields manifesting in all the different energy states. And then we have this dream state, and we don't believe in the dream state. Well, you have to believe in the knowing, because the knowing is in the dreaming. And what you're seeing in your dreaming, that's seeing, that's believing. So don't be deceived when they talk about seeing is believing. So when we conclude with the embodiment, what does that mean? When you came through that plasma gen travel agency, remember you were born to Earth. You didn't know how and you didn't care how, but you were born for a reason, and you didn't know the why or didn't care to know why. But you could have traveled to Mars, and you don't know how and you don't know why and you don't care to know why. All you know is you weren't born to Mars. So we understand that we can't insult the ignorant, but we can certainly insult the soul, because the soul is embodied within the inertia fields. And we see how the earth operates, where energy is coming in and more energy is coming in, and then energy is emitted out and more energy is emitted out. And so this represents part of the susceptibility of the planet, and how we're able to make this plasma transcendence. And so when we're looking at and saying, well, the x-axis and the y-axis are magnetical, and it's the z-axis, the absorptive axis, that is gravitational. Well, we find that the cosmic ray interaction opens up all the doors. You don't have to decide which door. You just have to make the plasma deal. And so when you look at the unbalanced anomaly and you say, well, if we're going into a lower field strength, we are magnetical, and if we're going into a higher field strength, we're gravitational. Well, since it's a two-way street, we have to understand that it's our emotions which reinforce the condition. So if you look at cellular repair, there's a direction to start the repair, but there's also a direction to stop the repair once the repair is completed. So who's doing the ordering? It's the soul. The soul is ordering the cellular repair. It's the physicality that is responding to that. And that is reinforced by our emotions. And if our emotions are dependent on the support of the karmic cycle, which is the baggage that we carry forward, I think it's time to stop and understand that we don't have to just believe what we see. We have to open the door to that which we don't see, because that door leads to our gravitational stability, and everything else is magnetical. And so by resolving that issue, we find that in order to maintain gravitational stability, as we go to a higher energy state, that becomes magnetical. As we go to a lower energy state, that becomes magnetical. The magnetical of the higher and the magnetical of the lower are not at the same field strength. So when we look at the GANs, if we remember that it's like a popcorn, and so it's a gas in the center, and in the center is a vacuum, and around the outside is a vacuum condition. And so this is energy in motion. And so this becomes, in fact, a Gans explosion of the nanostate. It's the next stage. So it's of a higher field. And so when we look at the somatidian biology in a somatoscope, which is 30,000 times magnification, we can see the vacuum condition in between the red blood cells and the somatid. And then we can see the vacuum condition within the red blood cell. Well, how can you see a vacuum condition when it's not visible? Precisely. So when we look at the peace stone and we say, oh, no, that's not me. What's me is in the inside the peace stone. Really? Well, what about the outside of the peace dome? What is that? Is that me also? Maybe we got things backwards. So when we look at the universal embodiment, you can't just come from nowhere and go to nowhere. There's nowhere is nowhere. So there has to be some kind of gravitational stability. So whether you're some kind of physical craft or some kind of plasmatic craft, you're gravitationally stable. And so wherever you're going and whatever you're coming from, is the magnetical reference. So we have to understand that our planetary space is gravitationally stable. And when we're coming to and going from that particular place, that's magnetical. And if we're traveling on a outer space basis, that too becomes gravitational. And when we're launching from and landing to is also magnetical. So we see the gravitational relationship with the magnetical stability relationship. And so we see that our Earth space embodiment can be transcended, transmuted, transformed, or simply transported. So if you're looking at the field, understand that you have to open up the field to see what's inside. So you have to understand that it has to be gravitationally stable. You have to understand that it has to interact with the magnetical stability of the outside and the inside, which are in a vacuum condition. And you have to understand that we operate in that gravitational stable condition in between these two positions. That's what allows us to travel through the various dimensions. So if we're talking about the gravitationally stable physicality, that is materialization. But if we're searching for outer space, we have to understand that the gravitational stability is in the reality dimension of some space and its relationship with the other space. So in other words, we have to transfer from the gravitationally stable Earth space to the gravitationally stable some other space and understand that the relationship is magnetical. So whether it's our transparency point or whether it's our manifestation point, it's a two-way street. And so we see the layering of the gravitational fields interacting with the magnetical stable fields. It's just like a cake. And you have different layers and different flavors. So you have now a feedback flavor change. And with that, you create this embodiment radiance. So our emotion of vision, which we see in terms of our physicality with respect to our senses, is nothing more than cosmic ray absorption. And our soul positioning is nothing more than cosmic ray emission. That's the difference between the plasmatic reality versus the physical reality. It's just our point of view. And so either reality is the soul of inertia. And so when we look at the star formation of inertia, we can see that it has to have a gravitational stability, and then we can flip our poles however we want. And so we can dream, and we can dream of small schemes, or we can dream of bigger pies. Well, that pie in the sky. It all depends on being gravitationally stable. It's from that point we can resolve who the initiator is. We are. We're the last man standing. We make the choices. We are the contributors. We are the ones who are the product of the cosmic ray feeding, and we are the ones who are enhancing the cosmic ray feeding. And so all of this has to be under the category of energy and motion. So what we talk about PM ticks and charges and light and cosmic rays, the emotion of knowledge, dreams, intentions, these are all the interaction of two plasmatic field forces spiced with the essence of the individual and a thing called love. This is all part of the art of giving. So this kind of imbalance that we have where we're doing all the taking, and just to maintain our balance, we do a little bit of giving, and we see that our taking from our partner creates a new physicality, offspring. But that's just an anomaly, because what that is just the false embodiment of our soul, where there's power versus money and power over money. There's a ranking opinion, which leads to self-delusion. And then the perfect storm traits where you undermine, deceive, or self-destruct. The true power is when you are your own healer, when you have this dynamic soul plasma, which embodies the soul of the creator, the soul of the earth, the soul of the family of humanity, the soul of man, the soul of the body, and the soul of cells, and all this simply irresistible lust for life. And we know that it's strong because we have these excitable visitors, and they have this vacuum condition, and they want to come to our planet. And so the question becomes, well, wait a second, who's the initiator and who's the plasma receiver? So we have to understand that in order to travel on the Morality Express and experience the simply irresistible energy of love, that this is a two-way carbon connection. So we are intimately involved. This is part of the process. And so that's a reflection of the inner space peace bridge, which is me. And that is the peace connection to the plasma outer space highway. And this is in a vacuum condition. So the morality is embodied in a gravitationally stable condition. And from that, it reflects its magnetical stability. And that is the balance that allows the science to meet the soul of man for peace. And that transcends all of us, because now we're in the post-December 16, 2022 era of choices, where we can transmute into outer space from that graceful inner space and the bountiful space at present that we see as our Earth space. But we need to transcend the limitations of nuclear science. And after 514 Thursdays in a row, the Knowledge Seekers workshops have been discussing the greater oneness. And it's been a hard road. It's been a hard road. There's a feeding and a feedback, and man is feedback dominant. We have to understand that we're dynamic, that we can transcend it. We're in the post-November the 11th, 2023 era. And this is the Kesh plasma token representing the race for peace. The exchange of the plasma science and technology offered in exchange for peace. There have been casualties. We're closing the lens center. We're moving from the materialization science. We're moving into a new space age. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. Teachings on plasma science. Welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers. Life's learning lessons transmute your outer space preference and sentimentality. There's a world peace treaty. Sign it. Sign it with meaning. Because the dilution of emotion allows fields of life choices free from boundaries or abuse. And your ethos is your GPS position on the peace roadmap. And the universal community is your travel guide. The speed of love manifests and determines your inner space emotional constructs. The earthbound soul family seeks physical and emotional gravitational vitality, and the emotional of knowledge is the embodied in the transmutation connection. This connects equally to the universal cosmic rays freedom broadcast channel of inner space. The soul embodies the resonance with the proper plasma universe. The plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this series, and that's the end of the review series. Thank you all. Hope you enjoyed the trip.
Thank you, Alex. You certainly put a lot of terms and ideas into this one teaching. But it's not the end of you, I hope. You'll still be with us, and your plan is to redesign some teachings. Is this my understanding is correct?
Well, yes, it is. We have to move ahead, right? We can't. We have to do it in such a way, though, because there will be a whole host of new knowledge seekers, and they're going to be going through the entire process that we've gone through. But they won't have the so-called luxury of the amount of time that we've spent on that. So we have to fast track it. So I was hoping that my classes would shorten the amount of hours on for some people. And in the review process, we would distill that even further. But the main focus, as has been distributed, as has been demonstrated, I'm sorry, on the review series, is trying to differentiate between the physicality and the plasma reality. And the reason for that is because we're also physically dominant. And in that process, we totally ignore the plasmatic condition, even though we acknowledge birth and death and all the other stuff that goes with creation, but refuse to acknowledge the science behind it and claim that we don't know and we still have to do more research and like that. And the question for the Keshe Foundation is, we announced this technology to the public on a grand scale in 2011, and that was 12 years ago. And would anything change if we waited another 12 years? And so, you know, if you keep doing things the same way and expect different results, you're kind of lacking in some brain power there. So it's time for change. And the soul of the family humanity knows, but they just don't know. They're not aware. So I think the need to differentiate between the physicality and the plasma reality is not as important as to understand and how we can transcend those two realities, regardless of which dimension we're in. So to understand that there are different field strengths, different energy levels, different people, this is what this diversity of the humanity family is what we call the spice of life. And it's wonderful. So we're not setting out to diminish the spice of life. We're accommodating it and allowing people to progress on their own path and at their own rate. It's just that if the humanity family means to progress, then those who want to progress faster need to be allowed to do that. And the only way that we can do that, and I think has been demonstrated in a bazillion ways, is that peace and prosperity is the ticket. And don't look at the mess that we've created. Look at the glory that the universe has created. And it does that reliably with supreme gravitational stability and shares it unconditionally with magnetical stability. And we're the benefactors. So if you have it, use it or lose it. And if you don't have it, then don't worry about it. You have nothing to worry about. But we all have a responsibility. And we all made that plasma deal to come here. And we didn't do that in a vacuum. We did that with the help of the soul of the family of humanity. And the family of humanity interacts with the family of all the other beings. Because if we came here for a purpose, we have to admit that the soul of the family of the verticals also came here for a purpose. So what right do we have to say that our purpose is of a greater purpose? On what basis can we make that assertion? It's preposterous. Because the decision that we make is based on the inertia of the environment that we have chosen. And did we choose it? Yes, because this is home. So wherever you go, you are home. And the reason you go there is because you're at home. And if you go somewhere and it's not home, well, then you'll come back because we all want to go home. Thanks very much, Mark.
Okay, I know Ike had brought something up earlier. Do you want to go into that again, Ike, about the separation between the magnetical and gravitational? Maybe we could. Did we just lose your screen, Alex? I'm only seeing your name on there.
Yeah, I was just talking about the spiral Mr. Cash was describing there. If you can draw that, and from the spiral, it says the magnetical and the gravitational has a space between that. So apparently it's parallel, and one goes to magnetical, and the other goes to the energy flows goes to magnetical, and the other goes to gravitational. So I wanted to see a picture of that, and what is this space like? How do you determine the one that goes to magnetical, and what causes that?
Okay, Alex had dropped out for a moment. He's back. Do you want to repeat that? I have the text
No,
pulled
I
up.
heard it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, but yeah, could you replay that text so that you can refresh my content? Like, do you have that handy?
Yes. Okay, let me just share the screen.
Okay.
See if we can do that. Here and here. Okay. Here, he's talking about looking between the lines. Okay. You cannot connect when you are giving. You can connect when you're taking. As you take and as your interaction with other fields, the more deeper you go, the weaker you become. But as you are weaker, the stronger attracts, which is in the center to give. This way, I draw the spiral, has the line of creation. It's the way the universe is created. You see the line, but look at the space in between. It's more of, and as it opens up, there is more gap between the lines. You look at the lines, but you have to look what's in between the two lines. And by interaction, the more it interacts with the other fields as it goes to the center, it becomes the weakest and weakest because it's given more of its energy in the interaction to get to that point. So when we talk, when you get to the center, you're at the lowest level that you can switch. Is the way that how much you can decrease the salinity that it becomes alkaline that it gives. Is that clear? It
Yes, can I
looks,
take the screen back?
yes, take the screen.
Okay, just a moment. Let me see if I
And
can.
this is what you were referring to, correct, Ike?
Correct.
Okay. Let's see if we can open that up to see the gap.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just having some
Okay, I still have the screen. I can stop sharing. I can bring up a whiteboard that you can
No,
annotate.
okay. I'm gonna grab it right now. It's just that I realized that I have to do a certain sequence here.
Okay, you
And
have it now.
it's a skill. That's all. I just have to be more skillful. Okay. We
Is that,
shall.
does that mean you were gravitationally unstable at that moment?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh,
You know, those terms, gravitationally unstable, magnetically unstable, it did cause me some confusion. But let's continue on with Ike's question about this gap and how the energy is given off in that gap. Whoops.
What's up? Just a moment. I want to find that.
Is somebody's phone ringing?
I'm
Alex, I just muted you. I thought it could be your phone. It's not my phone. Okay. Just come right back in. Alex, sorry, I thought it might been your phone. Those were the only two mics open. So where did that sound come from?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
But allow me to continue here. So this air bubble in the center of the reactor The question is how did it get there and how did it become stable? And since it's in the center, it seems to be far removed from any other surface tension.
Now remember with this, and I know Rick's shown it a number of times, in the horizontal position, it travels to the center. When it's in the vertical position, it doesn't seem to go to the center. There's a different interaction with it when it's in the vertical position, as opposed to rotating it in the horizontal position, as I recall.
Well, certainly, because you're adding to the vertical, the transition forces of the Earth. But here you are at 90 degrees to that. You're perpendicular to that. So you have the vertical force of the Earth and you have the horizontal force of the rotating field of this reactor, right? So the
Okay, that's a good explanation. Yeah.
okay, but now, in order for it to maintain its position, it has to interact magnetically and gravitationally with something. And so what was missed was the fact that this is in a vacuum condition. This air bubble is a lot smaller than the air bubble that Rick put in there originally. You see how big the air bubble is? So this is not rotating. And so it is just sitting at the top of the reactor. But once it starts rotating, then suddenly that air bubble shrinks and it moves to the center. So what causes that shrinkage? So this is, this is the same thing that happens when you have a milkshake and you have a straw and you enjoy the milkshake by creating a vacuum in the straw, and voila, the milkshake comes into your mouth and you have a flavor explosion. A lot of satisfaction. But how does this maintain its gravitational stability? So it has to go beyond the gravitational stability of what it is maintaining. And so it actually is releasing a magnetical force field without losing its gravitational stability. Wait a second, how can it do that? If it starts to emit its magnetical stability, won't it reduce its gravitational stability? Well, apparently not, because it was very stable. So we have to understand it is constantly emitting. And if it's doing that and it's constantly absorbing, that's the nature of the balance of the mag-grav field. And because it's smaller, we understand that it's in a vacuum condition. So what's interesting is that we know there's a vacuum condition on the outside of the Earth's magnetosphere. But this particular experiment was on Earth in Rick's lab, and he was able to create a vacuum condition inside. The vacuum condition outside still exists. So we have to understand that the vacuum condition allows a magnetical emission. Because we know that if we look at Earth from outside, we can see the Earth. The only reason that you can see that Earth is because of the magnetical emission. So there's a magnetical emission on the outside of the Earth, and that's in a vacuum condition. There's a magnetical emission at the core of the Earth, and that's possible because of the vacuum condition. So we have a balance of vacuum conditions. That's what leads to the magnetical stability. So the gravitational stability is in between. Okay, but the vacuum condition in the core is of a different field strength from the vacuum condition outside of the magnetosphere. So if we look at the pH table and we say that the alkaline condition is gravitational, and the where are we here? Let's do this one. So we say the alkaline has a higher density and the acidic has a lower density. So the lower density is magnetical and the higher density is gravitational. So the hydrogen is magnetical and the oxygen is gravitational. However, what happens when you change from one pH level to another pH level? So the relationship to the hydrogen and the oxygen is the same, except it's at an order of magnitude higher. So therefore, as we're going from, let's start with the hydrogen 1 on the acidic, and within the pH of 1, it has to be more alkaline because that's the direction that it's going. It is still pH of 1, but the field strength is becoming more alkaline. So the susceptibility of it to go to the next level is higher. But that is not a gradual change. That is an incremental change. It goes from a pH of 1 to a pH of 2. And 2 is not 1 more. 2 is 10 times more, because that's how much energy was put in. To maintain that hydrogen 1 in the acidic condition of the pH of 1, you can fill up 8 oxygens within that pH of 1. So now you've got 9. That's the maximum. 1 more, and boom, it's pH of 2. And in the lowest end of the pH of 2, well, that's acidic. So the transition between the upper limit of the pH of 1 to the lowest limit of the pH of 2 is an energy state jump. It is it's a quantum leap is what it is. So that is instantaneous. So now your oxygen 8 plus the hydrogen 1 becomes hydrogen 1 in the level of pH 2. And this repeats. And then you have pH 3. So the lowest level of every single pH is a hydrogen 1. So the pH of 3 at the lowest level is the pH of 2, complete pH of 2, plus 1 more hydrogen. And it can absorb another oxygen, another 8 levels, and still stay within the pH of 3. And once it gets to the maximum, if more energy comes in, then it cannot remain at the pH of 3. It'll have to elevate to the pH level of 4. So what we're looking at in terms of physicality is the movement within one pH, where the oxygen 8 is, when they say pH, that's the potentiation of the hydrogen. So with a pH of alkalinity, the potentiation of hydrogen is very high. which means that the hydrogen is bound within the gravitational field. That's what makes it alkaline. But if the pH is low, then it can no longer hold the hydrogen. So we find that the potentiation of the hydrogen is no longer potential. It's actualized. And so it gives off. That's why you see hydrogen chloride bubble. All right? That's the release of hydrogen because it has a low pH. So you're seeing the reaction, the physical reaction of hydrogen being released into the atmosphere because it can no longer be held in there. So you're seeing the release of the potential. So when we are creating GANs and we're in an alkaline state, we're increasing the pH. So we are increasing the potential energy. We have more energy. And so in order to maintain more energy, we have to elevate to a higher state. Well, what is that higher state? Well, the first state is nano. The next state is GANs. And what happens after that? Well, then we have the plasma water. And what happens after that? Then we have the plasma field. And we've seen that field manifest in the center of the GANs. And then what happens after that? Well, then we have in the atmosphere. Then we have the plasma condition of hydrogen and the plasma condition of oxygen. And we have the plasma condition of CO2. Ike, how are we doing on the answer here?
Yeah, you are actually getting deeper in a different way. So it's interesting. I guess it's a follow-up on what I was going to ask. Because the drawing, you were explaining it differently. The drawing for the sparrow was what I wanted to find out how it connects to gravitational, but then you're using the pH, which I can actually relate to that. So it's a different way of explaining it. I have to revisit this again and listen to it.
Right, I'm a little confused myself. I was going to ask you, Alex, now, are you still going to answer Ike's question? Unless I missed it.
Okay, well, I wasn't trying to be a politician. What I'm trying to say is that the transcendence of the energy can stay within the state. So the higher energy feeds the lower energy. So the alkalinity feeds the acidic. But if you want to transcend energy states, then from that position, if you go more acidic, then you go to a lower energy state. If you want to be more alkaline, then you have to go to a gravitational state. But the problem with the gravitational state is that it becomes more dense. And so this is what we want. We want things that are more dense. So we would prefer gold to copper. We would prefer silver to copper, but we would prefer gold to silver. Well, what happens when you get into the radioactive stuff? That's even more dense. Well, what is the radioactive stuff involved with? Oh, that's nuclear science.
Alex.
Hi.
So let's say if the parallel lines of the spiral, one end of it is hydrogen and the other end is oxygen, then the pH, in the space gap between the two parallel lines is the 1 to 7, I believe.
Right.
The fields going to the center is my question. When the field goes to the center, it becomes more alkaline, or it could be more acidic. So how do you relate it to this periodic table, to what you're explaining now?
Okay, well, the highest element would be alkaline and the lowest element would be acidic. So the hydrogen is acidic.
So what's the center?
I'm sorry. What was the item?
What would be the center? The center, what would be the center? To where it will flip to, I guess.
That depends on the environment.
Depends on the, okay.
Yeah, so you take a sugar cube, and in a normal room temperature environment, it's crystalline. You put that in a hot beverage, and it's liquid. But the sugar is still there, so it's changed its form. Well, let me how about this? If this would be helpful. In your family, I would say that you'd be the focal point. But if you were to go to a music concert and you would be part of the audience, I would say that you would just disappear in the crowd. Then the focal point would be the artist who is playing music on the stage. So how come in one environment you're nobody, and in your family environment you're the focal point, you're the center? So that has to be taken into account. And if I may, then the other thing that has to be taken into account is just like in your car, isn't it? You have to figure out which one is the which direction you're going. Who's controlling the steering wheel? Who's controlling the shifter? Are you going forward? Are you going in reverse? And the thing is, you're still going. You don't stop going, right? It's just you're going in a different direction. So who's the one who's making that decision?
I think it needs a bit more explanation. Even Rick was a bit confused about all this, and Mr. Kesh said it's not very confusing. Not when you know. But we can continue to open that up, but maybe Ike has some follow-up or some comments.
No, thank you, Alex. I will just listen again for better understanding of it.
Yeah, myself as well. Yeah, it's an interesting understanding how you can do this switch, but apparently they saw that on the graphs in the system when he said they're all going to switch, and apparently they did in the last well, I think it was the meeting before, the Friday before last.
So there has to be input of energy to cause the switch, doesn't it?
Or you get to the weakest to become the stronger, or the lowest, perhaps.
Well, the lowest is the one that's moving.
Well, I'm thinking of a plasma coming down the chute towards the center. It's losing its fields, it's losing its energy as it gets closer and closer to the center. When it gets to the center, then it switches, and somehow the stronger energy comes in, and it becomes the strongest to come out. Again, this is not that easy for me.
Well, it has to come out.
But it doesn't come out as the weakest. Apparently, it comes out as a stronger.
No, well, oh, well,
Because it's lost all its energy. It is at the lowest level. So now, being at its lowest level, it can attract stronger energies, or the stronger energies come in. It's a little misunderstanding, I'm sure, on my part.
oh, okay. So now we're seeing how difficult this is. Remember the game of musical chairs?
Oh, yeah.
So you have the winner. He's sitting in the center, and he's by himself, right?
Correct.
So he won the game. He's the guy who got all the energy. All the others departed. Now what happens? He's no longer
Now you restart the
The
game.
game is over. No, the game is over. Now he goes somewhere else.
Okay, I thought perhaps that was the switch point.
It is a switch point. Yeah. Because up until then, we are making the circle smaller and smaller and smaller. So if it keeps getting smaller, it keeps getting more and more energy. But once it gets to the center, what's he going to do then? So what are we going to do? We're just going to leave him sit in the chair? You know, at some point he's going to get hungry. He may want to go to the washroom. Maybe he's got to go home at some point in time. So he's going to have to leave. Okay. The others have already left. So he's become the weakest. Right? Everybody's gone. He's left alone. So he's the weakest. What happens now? He's going to go somewhere. And wherever he goes, he's going to add to that.
Okay. Thank you, Ike, for bringing this. I'm sure we'll explore it more, or maybe have different ways to explain it a little easier for me. Alex in the 12th grade, I'm still in the first class.
I still try to find my my slide here.
Okay.
I'll find it.
Do you want to go further with this at this point?
No, I don't want to I don't want to bore the audience, but if you have specific questions, yeah, I'm here.
Well, let's open it up. Is there anyone who'd like to join the discussion on this or bring up another topic? Thank you again, Ike. It's leading to more understanding, even though there may be a confusing part in between. But this is what we have to do. This is why he said it's going to take all of us, plus the universal community, to open up this knowledge. It's quite a daunting task. That's why it probably is not going to happen overnight or within 30 days or a month or so on. Would anyone like to bring in another question? I saw Selena, someone had said that Selena is, it's referenced in the, as one of the Greek goddesses of the moon. Oh, here's a picture that I want to comment on, Alex, is this car. And you talked about the shape of the wing. Well, when man discovered that shape of the wing and he passed it through air, it always provides lift. And you were saying how the wing is thicker in the front and tails off in the back. And this creates that shape, passing it through air automatically provides lift. So why would you want to design a car that was thicker in the front, tailing off to the back, unless you wanted to lift that car off the ground? It, at least it seems this way in the matter state would be the correct way. Otherwise, you're going to lose the contact with the ground if you had the thicker part of the car in front and it tailed off in the back. I thought Audi had found that out with the TT when they had made that car, and they didn't test it on the track. They just used a computer model, but they found out it didn't have that, can we say, gravitational stability at high speeds. I think they had to add a couple of spoilers or something onto it to push the back of it down. Even though
Of course,
it was,
because they were only
Yeah.
using one field force.
okay, but why would you want a thicker part of a car in the front and the tail in the back? It seems it would automatically create lift, which would make it
Later.
gravitationally unstable.
No, but it would make it later, right?
Oh,
So
definitely. Yeah,
you wouldn't have to expend as much energy to move.
right. But as you approach the higher speeds, you lose contact completely.
Yeah, so this is where
Actually lift.
they put a wing, right? So, you know, it isn't putting a wing on the tail of a car isn't a fashion statement. You know, I think it's at 120 kilometers. I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, there is a threshold point where the wing starts to function properly and pushes down on the vehicle. So at that point in time, the faster the car goes, the more it hugs the road. So they call this ground effects also. There's the wing, and then there's the underbelly on how the car gets you know, pulled down to the road, so it doesn't fly off. But the point of the matter is that, oh, I know what I can do here. I can annotate, right?
Of course.
Oh, let's see if I can annotate on that. That would be cool. Okay, where's the there's the buddy there, right? Is that
I
the
think
buddy?
you just need to pick a pen and a line.
Okay, let me pick a, what will be a good color here. I guess we're going to try green then. How about that? And so we're going to say there is an emission here. Oh, no, just a moment. Excuse me. Excuse me. Where's my eraser? How about my undo?
Okay, I didn't
Okay.
see anything annotated yet
No, not yet.
on your
No.
screen. Nope, unless it hadn't come through.
Oh, they don't have all the variety here. Oh, well, okay. So I'm going to have to do it with the, okay. Did you see this? Yes, there it is, the green at the front, at the back. Well, I'm saying the front.
Okay, yes, it's thin lines. Yep, I see it. Okay.
Okay, so you understand that that's the emission. The car is gravitational. The emission is magnetical. So there are energies that are being emitted from the back of the car, right? There's more than one, right?
Okay.
Okay, these energies that are magnetical are negatively charged. Agreed?
I'm not gonna say I agree. Go ahead. That's your understanding. That's fine.
Okay, so let's forget whether it's negative or positive. Let's say they're the same polarity. So what happens when two charges with the same polarity come together?
Repulse or push against each other. Repulsion.
Right? So they repel. So we're good with that?
Yeah, let's continue.
Oh, I wonder if I'm going to have to. This isn't as good as it was before. So the question then comes in, what happens in here? What happens inside here? Now that these have repelled. So this energy that came out of the car, because they're all the same charge, have now repelled. So this ball that's in the center, what is that?
Could it be some sort of vortex?
Yes,
I'm
of course.
just guessing.
No, but of course there's going to be some kind, because it's going to be a
Good guess. Good guess. Okay.
well, it's a field, right? Well, what I'm saying is, oh, you know what? These pictures were right next to the other picture. Oh, that's embarrassing. Here's the picture of Rick's magnetical air pocket in the center of his horizontal rotating vacuum. Right? So that becomes magnetical. That becomes a vacuum condition. If that's a vacuum condition, what's happening to the car?
I can give you some kind of an explanation to what's going on.
Go for it, Randy.
If you travel behind a semi-trailer truck and you've got the cojones to get as close as you can to that truck, the draft of the air of that truck will pull you along the highway and you can let off the gas. So what kind of an energy is pulling your car? And we do this all the time in racing. If you can get close enough to the guy, it's called drafting. And then you pull out beside him and hammer the gas and you can pass him because you're playing with magnetical fields. And I would think you're zeroing it out when you're behind him. And then when you pull off to the side, and it's like you're taking it to another level and you gain. Am I correct?
So what do you think about that explanation, Mark?
It's not bad, but he's just gonna have to watch out that his radiator doesn't overheat in that drafting scenario. But
Okay,
yeah, that
you're raining on the parade.
Yeah, he rains on my
that.
race car and causes me to crash into the guardrail.
It sounds like you've driven before in a race, but yes, we've experienced that behind the truckers. They don't like that because they want to be able to see you in one mirror or the other when you get so close. But yeah, you definitely pulled along.
Yeah, so you see in the NASCAR racing, they all want to get in single file.
Correct.
Yeah, if you get a guy that gets out of that file, you see that eventually he's falling behind. So how can the one fall behind the group? Because the group has collectively more energy. So the group is gravitational, they stay together, and they're much stronger. And the poor guy is magnetical and he's weaker. So what he's trying to do is to get into another group. And if there's a gap in the thing, he's just going to slip right into jet stream and away he goes again. So then he's going to be stronger.
Yes, that's all well documented, how if you fall out of line there, you definitely lose everything. It's almost like they're traveling in a type of field or some sort of pocket that makes them collectively stronger.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a plasma reactor here. Okay. And we're going to, can we see that? Yeah. A maggrav in here. Okay. So all the energy that's coming from the maggrav is going to be magnetical, right? The car is physical. The maggrav is plasmatic. So now you have a drivetrain in the car, pushing the car, and you have a plasma field that's magnetical. And since these magnetical field lines of force are all of the same polarity, they will spread out. And when they spread out, they're going to create that vacuum condition. And so you will have a drivetrain that is contributing energy, and you will have a vacuum that is contributing energy. So when you're looking at the back end in here, and it is of a bigger dimension, you have more. And then if you're looking at the front, it's pointy. So what they're looking into the design originally, someone made a mistake and they say, I am going to take the pointy end and point that into the wind as if I'm going to cut it up. I'm going to cut the wind. So I'm going to cut the resistance to the airflow on the vehicle. Whereas on the plane, they want lift. So the engines are pushing the plane and the shape of the wing is causing a lift. So that's how you can take this unbelievably heavy metal airplane loaded with passengers and lift it up off the ground. But it has to go at a certain speed. This was the whole business with those planes that were supposedly hitting 9/11, the towers in New York. Every pilot knows that that was a physical impossibility. The planes would break up because of the back pressure of the air hitting the earth. They can't fly at that speed
At that
and
altitude, yeah.
at that altitude. So you have commercial aircraft that travel around 35,000 feet in the air, and you have military aircraft that travel at 50,000. Well, how can they travel at 50,000 feet up in the air? Well, military aircraft fly faster than commercial aircraft, right? So a commercial aircraft would do would you say 500 miles an hour?
It's
Would that be
probably an
correct?
average, yeah, depending on tailwinds or headwinds, yeah.
Yeah, so the military craft are traveling at multiples of that. Would you agree?
It's what's being reported.
Yeah, so they have to fly at a higher altitude. If a car were to go at 500 miles per hour, it wouldn't be able to stay on the track, is what you're saying, right? So what I'm saying, does it have to stay on the track?
Maybe I see a mic open.
Yeah,
Under?
yeah, I want to say, Mark, in Italy, they've designed the truck, and the front is like a drop, and it's going. The cargo is getting a little smaller at the back, and they say it can do much more speed and save more fuel. I don't know if you have heard.
Yeah, like a teardrop of some
Yeah,
sort.
yeah, yeah. The total opposite of the sports model.
But again, here we're talking about cars and we're talking about airplane wings. And is it in a way what we're talking about with the plasma understanding? Or is that more of a matter state understanding we're speaking of?
It is a matter state understanding, but you know, there's a capital M matter state and a small m matter state. So the rules are the same.
Okay.
And Alex, the shift you made from metaphysical there in the back is perfect. Yeah.
Okay, I think you're on speaker, Ander. We can't quite, I couldn't make out exactly what you were saying in your last sentence.
The shift Alex had made from the matter state to the plasmatic, with the real, the magnetic force and the vacuum in the vacuum.
Okay, is there,
The vacuum condition has to be gravitational.
Yeah, but vacuum.
okay, maybe we can open this up at another time further, more understanding, different examples perhaps.
So you can see how difficult it is. We have years and years spent learning things about one way, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, you know, we have to learn things another way, and it's so difficult because you have to do two things. You have to learn to unlearn the stuff you've learned, and then relearn the new stuff.
And isn't this what Mr. Kesh is telling us, that we've ignored some of these abilities, some of this, the idea of the soul and the rest of it for so long? As Alex said, we have to unlearn and start to learn a new understanding. So yeah,
And the
because
key
we,
point in this particular diagram, of course, is the driver. The driver is part of the field. Let me put it another way. The car is in 3 dimensions, right? Length, width, and depth. Now comes the driver. Which dimension are you in? You're not in the dimensions of the car. The car is physical, and you're a man. The car is metal, you're a man. You put the 3 dimensions of the car and the man together, and they drive as one. And when you finish your trip, you park the car, you turn it off, and the man gets out of the car. So inside the car, he's a man. Outside the car, he's a man.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting example when Mr. Kesh said that one of their relatives came back from Russia and said they've invented a metal that can fly. And they all said, how stupid, we know metal can't fly. Till that plane landed in Iran or something. And then they all realized what fools they are. So there's a lot of deeper understanding we need to go through here. And again, we're all in the same class and we're all at different levels. No one's above anyone else or no one's below. So we're all growing into this knowledge at different rates, different strengths of understanding. But we complement each other as well. Okay. Anyone else or Alex, have you finished?
What I would like to do is say thank you for everybody to allow me to be presenting here every Sunday for 4 years. And what is really exciting is how things have dovetailed. I had no idea that today's session, which is the last of the review session, dovetails with the fact that we are on the other side of the watershed. The new plasma science is coming into action. The world is not the same. We're in the post-November the 11th, 2023 sessions. So all of us are able to have a story for our grandchildren and say we were there. That's really something. So I want to thank everybody for being here and making all this happen. And now we don't have to make excuses and we don't have to have wishes. We need to start using what we have. And we need to make this place a better place. That's why we came here.
We're just finding out we have it, many of us, aren't we? I'm going to just take the screen, Alex.
Thank you so much.
So we are just sort of finding out something that's been hidden to us and hidden from our ancestors, especially. That's part of the strength of the doubt, is that all the souls that we're carrying from all the ancestors, these fields, have never understood this. This makes no sense. So this is where the monkey brain comes in and says, no, you really can't operate in an energy dimension. This is not what we've all thought about. We've always thought about blood, sweat, and tears, all matter state. So this is where I think some of our confusion comes in. And of course, we've ignored it ourselves for most of our lives. And of course, many of the people around us say, poo-poo, that's just a lot of bunk in more than one way. And so to fit in, we kind of hide it or don't express it. But now we're really we're breaking beyond that limitation that others have put on us, whether it's been the university, the mother and father, some of the religious people, and so on and so forth. So we're breaking free of that and becoming the last man standing. And this is part of this understanding, is that you are the last man standing. We have to accept it. And I think it'll become easier as we start to demonstrate to ourselves that we can feed ourselves in a way, maybe with system assist, but that's just a learning process to actually do it fully ourselves and to move our physicality and to create wellness within ourselves. I think people have already done many of these things. So I want to thank everyone for being here and being part of this. And of course, this is a little keychain, a memento that was given in Manchester. And I think they're good words for all of us. May you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are. And may you be proud of the difference you make. And we're all making a difference, even though it doesn't seem that way. The matter state is not reflecting that so much, but more and more, slowly, this is all going to come out. And the next generations will enjoy it immensely if we don't directly. So hopefully we'll see some more beautiful developments coming up. I'd like to, if there's no other comments, anyone else want to say anything, share anything, take an exception to what's been said today? Feel free. This is a class where you can talk back to the teacher.
Yeah, I just want to thank Alex for the full teachings you do all the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so from the last workshop, I believe it is, we'll play a video, Magrav is you. So we get this understanding and see if we can correlate what you've been twisting those copper coils is all about and bring it to the next level of understanding. As Mr. Ketch said, the target the whole time has been you and your capabilities. We're all made in the image of the Creator. So you carry all of those capabilities, or most of them anyway. And I thought we'd play this, then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Again, anyone else have anything they'd like to voice, anything they'd like to share with the others? Hopefully we're all moving in the correct direction. I think we are, even though it is a slow process. As I said, we'll see things moving more and more, and especially if you start to see other knowledge seekers, as Mr. Kesh said, drinking from that fountain or transmuting, you'll be much more probably interested in that you can do it. It will, just having the others do it will bring you a strong sense of confidence that you can do it. And he's already said that. It's for all of us. One by one, they'll start moving through this gate into the understanding of their capabilities, to all of our capabilities. And the matter state will be left to the foundation, but also those who want to develop that route of travel. And so you may be able to do both, or just travel in the dimension of energy, transmute, travel in the craft part way, transmute the rest of the way, or go on a full excursion on a craft perhaps, and come back and stay in the physicality the whole time. So the possibilities are limitless of what's coming, what's here, and what's further to be developed. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone making any comments, so